Hi all, this is Allmighty and welcome to this video. So today it's another day for a Stockfish level 7 analysis. This time it is the game number 2 that I've played a week or 2 weeks ago. So the first game ended in a draw. I've analyzed that video, you've seen it, and now it's the second game. Both of the games will be listed in the description if you want to check them out. After this analysis, as I've said, I'm going to find another engine that I'm going to play against, and if you have some suggestions, definitely mention them in the comments down below. Other than that, let's jump into this game because it's going to be a long one, and the video lasted for 36 minutes playing 88 moves, so it will be a nice one. This time I'm playing with the black pieces. Stockfish is white, he plays e4, and I continue of course with the Sicilian, something that I've played a very long time, always try to improve on it. Knight to c3, going for the closed variation is something that I kinda gotten used to playing against Stockfish, because he doesn't really go into main variations immediately. He goes into some closed variations where then he later on in the game tries to find some advantage. I continue normally. Knight to c6, we see knight to f3, and now knight to f6. So I want to keep my options open. If he in the end plays d4, I want to go for my favorite Lasker opening in the Sicilian, but he continued with bishop to b5, so we have a totally different game. I play d6, d4, pawn captures, queen captures. Of course, the knight cannot capture because he is pinned, and there is a check here, so bishop to d7 to unpin the knight. The queen is attacked, so we see queen going back to d3. a6, attacking the bishop, and bishop to a4. Now I played knight to b4, but I also could have simply gone with g6, developing the bishop to g7 and going castling, or maybe even e6. But I wanted to exchange this light square bishop, and then maybe have this knight to pressure on the queen, and being able to support into the d5 move. So I played knight to b4, now the exchange is kind of forced, so bishop to d7, queen to d7, and queen goes to d2. Queen to d2, not the best of moves, of course. It would be nice to play the queen back to e2 or some square like that. Here you're in the way of the dark square bishop. e6, castles, and bishop to e7, so simply continue with the development, and rook to d1 here, pressuring here this square. Queen moves to c7, and I did this specifically because the threat of if I don't play it, if I for example go castle, then e5 is a possibility. The knight has to move, and if I would go, for example, the knight move here, knight captures, and c4 is a move, and all of a sudden I'm in a losing game, having this pressure on the d square. And now you will see actually what is the power of the pin. If I move the knight here, c5, and now two pawns are attacking on d6, knight has to go here, pawn captures, and this is a losing game for black, especially against Stockfish. So in order to move out of the pin, I immediately play queen to c7, which indeed is the best move. Queen to e2, and now castles. Bishop to g5, h6, attacking the bishop, making also room for the king in the future of the game, and bishop to h4. Once again, Stockfish doesn't go for the exchange, he moves the bishop back. Now I put my rooks on the most important files, so first this rook to d file, because keeping it here doesn't do much, and also on e file I'm not seeing any progress there. The other rook will come on the c file, and that will be pretty much it. We see h3, also a move making room for the king for white, and here I played d5. So I could have also played rook to c8, but I wanted to take my chance at this moment. While I had it, I can go with d5, and that is perfectly fine for this situation. So here, Stockfish captured. I was also considering what happens after e5, what happens if he doesn't capture. All in all, it would lead to a very nice game for me, having this kind of a structure if he doesn't capture. So indeed, capturing is the best move. I captured with this knight. I could have also captured with another, it's pretty much the same. Bishop captures, queen captures, knight captures, and knight captures. And now we are in a situation, a pretty drawish game, where I would argue that after a move such as knight to e5, white is a little bit better, having the queenside majority with the pawns. But Stockfish continued with rook to d4, which is also a good move, going for the double up of the rooks, and I did the same. Rook to d6, queen to e5, the other rook comes here, and the other rook comes to e1. Also possible was rook from a to d1. Knight to f6, moving the knight out of the way so that I can establish the dominance on the d file. Rook comes to d1, and now rook to d5. So not going for the exchange, but rook to d5 in order to have a piece in the center of the board after all of these exchanges. Rook captures, and now queen to e1. Also possible was a rook captures on d5, probably even a better move, but here I play queen to d6, that after, because if I would simply capture, then queen captures on d1, white is the one that has the queen on the open file. But here with queen to d6, after rook captures, queen captures, I'm the one who has the queen on the open file. So always these little subtleties that lead to a better game, you should always pay attention to them. Knight to e5 finally, and now this is actually the first time where I thought that Stockfish is giving me opportunity to actually go for some advantage. The thing is that here I can quite simply capture the pawn, which indeed is the best move. Queen captures on a2, but it isn't all that simple, because of course at that time I was thinking, okay, he isn't threatening anything serious, I can defend everything. He played queen to c3, and all of a sudden I'm seeing all the possible threats. Queen to c8 check with picking up the b7 pawn, and not just that, I can simply defend that pawn. But if he still gives a check, king has to go to h7, and then a knight captures on f7. So I was thinking that what is the best possible way to deal with that threat? And I find this nice little maneuver, queen to a1, queen to c1. So queen to a1 check, king has to go to h2, and queen to c1. Now you see that there is a threat of actually queen to f4. So if queen to c8 and captures the pawn, then queen to f4 and the knight is lost. So let me quickly show that. Here, queen captures on b7, queen to f4, you're losing the knight. In the next move, you cannot defend it. So here, Stockfish did gave a check on c8. I went to h7. He captured in the end on f7. But still, queen to f4 check. g3 is, of course, not a good move because of queen to f2, king to h1, knight to e4, knight to g3 is an unstoppable threat. You would have to give up the queen because otherwise you're getting checkmated. So here you have to play on g1 or h1, pretty much the same idea. And here on king to h1, I played a knight to e4. And that was the whole idea. I want to include the knight into the game as well. I knew I was dropping another pawn, but I was going for the f2 pawn, and at the same time I was going for some chances in the attack, because here then the king is feeling a little bit cramped. Also, my king isn't doing too well, but we will see who will prevail in the end. It is a kind of an equal position, but with both sides having to deal with all sorts of calculation. For example, my queen here on f4 is perfectly situated. I'm not afraid of queen to h8, king to g6, knight to e5 moves, or something like that. But here, instead of going for the e6 pawn, we saw knight to d8 from Stockfish. I played knight to f2 check, of course, grabbing the pawn, and king to g1, queen to e3, and yeah, pretty much I knew that Stockfish will probably go for this pawn. So because of that, I played the queen here, but if queen would have captured here, then I would go with knight to h3. This is a double check, so king has to go to h2, and after this exchanges, knight goes to f2, and I'm going to this endgame with a pawn up. But knight to c5 simply grabs at least one of the pawns here. I could go for knight to g4, king to g3, and this, going for this pawn, I would have a little bit of an edge, but it wouldn't be sufficient to go for a winning endgame, but I was prepared to go into this variation when Stockfish surprised me for the second time. He played king to h2, and now I go on a rail of checks, giving checks to go for a better solution, for a better looking position. Here, and this is actually the best way how to approach this position. So first I gave a check on e5, king to g1, and now on e1, so not placing the queen back on e3. King goes here, queen h1, king to g3, knight to e4. So this is all forced, and those are the only moves that I can do to give a check, a proper check. King to f3, and now knight to g5. You see my knight all of a sudden from f2 came to g5, defending this pawn, giving a check. So after king to f2, I can move the queen to c1 and go for either of these pawns. This is exactly what I did in the game. First, I repeated moves to get a little bit more on time because I played 15 minutes plus 10-second increment. And again, knight to g5, king to f2, and queen to c1. Here, once again, Stockfish has a couple of options. He can capture on e6. Then I would simply go with knight captures on e6, queen captures on e6, queen captures with check. If you cover with the queen, you're in endgame with a pawn down. This is losing. So probably king to g1, king to f3 or something like that. Queen captures on b2, and now I'm in a queen's endgame with 2 pawns up. This is a very hard endgame, but I do have an edge with 2 pawns, and if I played it carefully and if I play it very long, I could definitely win this. Not like in comparison to the first game where I would go into the queen endgame where I only had 1 pawn, so that is very difficult to win. So I was looking forward to this. But in the end, once again, Stockfish didn't go for this e6 pawn. He played king to g3, and I was thinking that maybe I do have something here. And I wasn't really going through this variation where I capture both of these pawns immediately correctly, and I had under a minute, I think already here, or 2 minutes on the clock. So I started giving checks again. Knight to e4, king to h2, queen to f4, king to g1, queen to e3, king back, and I was giving these checks, trying to think of something, but at some point I stopped giving checks because it was useless. I would either go for a draw, but once again, like in the first game, I didn't want to draw. I wanted to go for a win. My best chance was to go for these pawns, but in the end I ended up in this situation where I played knight to g5, keeping an eye on this pawn, but decided to give away this pawn. But once again, Stockfish doesn't go for this pawn. He plays queen to c7. I played queen to e4. Now keeping an eye on this pawn as well. He could have captured it once again, but he played queen to c3. Now I played e5 and got rid of the threat of actually capturing on e6. This is the first weak pawn that I'm getting rid of. But at this point, Stockfish finds the best move, which is queen to d3. He can simply go for the queen exchange and continue on with the play. This is a drawish endgame, even though I'm having a pawn at the moment. I played b5 because if I would go capture, then after b5 I was afraid of a move such as h4. But later on, after analyzing, actually I do have a way out. As you can see, the knight cannot go here or here. Every square is covered. I can actually play e4. And if pawn captures, then here pawn captures on d3, and this pawn is unstoppable. So you cannot capture it. You play d4 and now e3. King has to come out to actually enter the square, and now with knight to e4, king to f3, I saved my knight, but as you can see, I have to give up a pawn. So it was a possibility, but once again, it is a drawish position. But b5 is also fine. Here, Stockfish for some reason went immediately for the exchange, knight to e4, and once again, I'm given a little bit of an edge. Knight to f7 is the move. Of course, this pawn will fall either way, either on c6 or on f7, because I cannot move the knight and then protect the pawn. But one thing that I noticed, once again, this knight has a beautiful position here, covering these two squares, which are the main squares where the king can go out. And I wanted to use this time to bring my king closer to this side of the board and try to challenge these pawns. So king to g6, knight to e5, king to f5, attacking the knight. And here Stockfish once again had a chance to go for example, knight to c6. This is a drawish game. And after the idea that I had king to f4, he can play b4. And let me quickly show you these moves. He can grab this pawn, and after me covering on this pawn, he has the time to enter with the king and go for these two pawns. So I can grab this pawn, but as you can see here, this is a drawish game because the knight can yeah, he can give up a knight for this pawn and then pick up these 2 pawns. In the end, it will be a draw because the knight will give itself for these 2 pawns. But yeah, that is the case. That is a situation which definitely could have happened. But here, Stockfish once again gives me one final chance, which I should have taken advantage of. He played knight to f3. I play king to f4, knight to d4, and king to e3. Now you can see there is once again a situation where he can go for knight to c6 and this variation that I showed you previously, but with one big difference. King to d2, b4, king c2, knight to b8, king comes here, knight captures, king to c4, and g3. So you see that I didn't need. So there is knight to c7 missing, and there is knight to d6 missing, me protecting this pawn. So I didn't need to do that, and this way I'm forcing the king to go out of this way, once again losing a tempo for him. Knight to f6, king here, knight to d5, I'm going to capture this pawn. Knight captures, and now of course knight has to go back to c7. Of course you don't want to exchange, because then the pawn simply goes to a queen. Knight goes to d5, knight b5, king b5, and here after a couple of moves you see that I'm simply defending the pawn on g7, and this is a winning endgame. So let me go back at this situation. F knight to f3. After king to e3 he played back knight to f3 instead of knight to c6. But still, I'm in a winning endgame. I could have played a5 here, but I decided to move with the king further. King to e2. b4, king to d1, and now knight to e5. It doesn't really matter even if you play knight to d4, because then I can go with the king like this. Still, I will win this pawns either way. King captures, knight here, and here once again a critical moment in the game where I totally lost the focus, because at that point I was just thinking that I cannot play here or here, because in the end knight to c5 I have to capture, pawn captures, and this pawn is unstoppable. I'm losing the game. While on the other hand I can simply capture the pawn, knight captures an a5, the knight cannot stop both of the pawns, so he can give himself up for one of the pawns, but the other will become a queen. So once again missing a chance there to go for a win. I played king to c3, and after knight to c5 I could have gone with the same idea. Missed it. I could have gone with a5. So now if knight captures, king to b4, it is the same idea like before. And if pawn captures, then of course knight to c5. You are covering this square, and once again the pawn is unstoppable. Missed the chance there. So really wanna work on my endgame there. And here, because of all of that, I played knight to f6, and all is fine. So I didn't lose my advantage. I'm still winning this game, but of course it will be a little bit harder. If knight to a6, I can play knight to d5 and capture this pawn with the knight, so that is fine. So g4 was played. I played king to b4, knight to a6, and king to c3. So now I'm ready to push this pawn up. King to g3, and now one very important move which I of course saw is g5. And g5 doesn't allow the king to come through f4, f5, g6 to pick up the pawn. It will be much harder for the king to go like this now, to enter here and pick up the h6 pawn. So that was the whole idea. He goes to f3, I play b4, and he doesn't give up the knight just yet. So he plays king to e3. As you can see, I'm covering very correctly and very smart with the king and the knight and the pawn this side of the board, so king cannot enter here. And that was very important, because if king could have entered, if the white king could have entered, then he would capture these pawns and it would be a drawn game. Here I played b3, c5, and this is the moment where I lost it all. Because I knew that I had the situation very well covered, but I knew if I play b2, he will play knight to a4, give up the knight, and then after king to d4, I wasn't sure if I would manage to capture here and go for these pawns. Well, in the end, I could have simply played that. Let me just show you this variation now. Knight to a4, king to b3, I give up a king, king to d4, and I can simply go with the king. King e5, knight captures on g4. Very important move which I would have to calculate. Pawn captures, king to d3, and now It is simply a matter of knowing the pawn endgames. Here in this situation, you can see the king cannot go back to defend the pawn, and he is not in time to grab this pawn, because here, for example, even if he plays king to h5, I have king to f3. Capture this pawn, I capture this pawn, and this is a winning endgame. So here, after knight to c5, I didn't want to go for b2, fearing king to d4, but now I will never do this again. I played knight to d5 check. Allowed king to e4, but I was thinking knight to f4 is a very nice idea, going for these pawns. h4 I saw, and now I played b2, completely losing the endgame. What I should have played here in this situation is knight to h3, but I first want to show you what happened in the game. Here I played b2, and of course knight to a4 is a necessary move. King b3, knight captures, king captures, and king goes in. Knight goes on h3. If I would capture the pawn, then king captures the knight, and he is in time to grab both of these pawns. So I played knight to h3, king to g6, pawn captures. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, it is the same. King can capture on h6. If I capture later on or don't, it's pretty much the same idea. The thing is, I'm putting my knight here on h3 in the path of this pawn. So king to h5 is a necessary move. If king comes here, then I can play a couple of different moves. For example, knight to f4. The point is that this pawn is unstoppable and black is winning. So don't capture this pawn, but king to h5 and capture this pawn first. Knight to g5, king captured, king to c3, and here, after a couple of moves, this is a drawn game. Stockfish could have captured the pawn, but he wanted to establish the dominance and played around with me a little bit. He played king to h7 here. I played knight to g4, and here he captures the knight first. If I would move the knight, then he would capture the pawn, thus bringing it to a game draw by insufficient material. So here, yeah, I played with the pawn for a little bit, and here he finally captured it, and it was a draw because the kings are the only ones which stayed on the board. So that was that case, but I wanted to bring out back this position after knight to f4, h4. Instead of pushing b2, which happened in the game, I should have played knight to h3, and this is one big difference. If we copy the moves that were played in the game, for example, king to f5, and to be honest, there aren't any better moves, it is a little bit of a different scenario, because now here pawn captures on h4, and you can see that the king isn't on g6, so he is not able to come on h5 to pick up this pawn. If he goes on g6, then a knight to f4, and this pawn is unstoppable. The main idea and the main difference here is that I didn't lose too tempo for actually pushing the pawn, allowing the knight to give a check, and then picking up the pawn. I saved that one necessary tempo which was needed to actually go for a win in this game. I missed it, and in the end it was a draw. So let me just show you this variation until the end. King to g6, knight to f4. King here has the capture, and yeah, h3, h2, h1, whatever you play in the end. I can even give up my knight here for this pawn. King captures, and this knight cannot cover both of the pawns in this situation. Thus, he can give up himself for at least one of the pawns, but yeah, it isn't enough. This is a winning endgame for black. So yeah, a longer game and a longer analysis. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a very exciting game for me, and I hope it was for you. That being said, yeah, that's pretty much it. As I've said at the beginning of the video, finish my Stockfish series for now. Later on, after some more training, I'm going to try the challenge again. Of course, I'm going to record it and upload it to YouTube. That being said, hope you enjoyed this game. Looking forward to the next engine games, and yeah, I'll see you next time.